Welcome to the Upgrade Your Education Business podcast. I'm your host, Sumantha McMahon, and today I'm talking about overcoming some common mindset blocks that we all experience. And whether you're a new business owner, whether you're an experienced business owner, I hope you'll enjoy this episode and be able to relate to parts of it as I weave and navigate through these different tricky situations. So let's dive in. Welcome to the Upgrade Your Education Business podcast. I'm your host, Sumantha, and I'm so pleased you're here. As an education business owner myself and a former teacher, I understand the nuances that only apply to us. So in this podcast, I share fluff-free, tailored and actionable ideas that you can mould to suit your needs. If you'd like to take this conversation further, please do reach out. I would love to meet you. And finally, it would mean the world to me if you could leave a review. That way, you'll be helping me help more people. Thank you for tuning in. Enjoy. Now, I'm going straight in, and the one I'm starting with is imposter syndrome. I talked about it a few weeks back in one of my shorter episodes, but I'm starting with this because it's probably the most complex, but also the one that most people experience at some point. Now, I'm not an expert on this. I'm not a psychologist or any kind of specialist in that field, but I can talk about my own experiences and the experiences of my clients and how we've navigated through it together. I think a really good place to start is by coming up with a sentence or a phrase that articulates what imposter syndrome looks like and feels like to you. So it could be variations of things like, I don't know enough to be able to do this. I don't feel comfortable calling myself an expert. I need to be realistic. Those big goals are for other people, not for me. Now, regardless of the variety of sentences and phrases that people might come up with, one commonality that is often the case is this feeling of not being good enough, of not knowing enough. And when we feel this way, we often resort to learning. We want to learn more. And that's a great response. But something that's important here is the narrative, because unless that narrative changes or shifts, then you're going to be afraid of that word expert, and you'll never learn enough to feel comfortable with it or to feel comfortable in your expertise. If you're in this headspace, as I talk about in episode PS 66, often what happens is the more you learn, the more you realize you have yet to learn. And instead of that learning empowering you, it can be paralyzing. So we really have to strip things back to that sentence or that phrase. What narrative are you telling yourself that needs to change or needs to shift? Could you accept, for instance, that an expert isn't someone who knows everything, but someone who has made all the different mistakes or enough mistakes? Could you accept that an expert is continually learning, but can still bring real value to the table? That one is inspired by the book we did in September called The 4 Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss in the book club. And another one from the book is an expert could be seen as someone who simply knows more than their clients and enough to make a genuine impact. Perhaps you can replace the word expert with a word you feel more comfortable with. I actually posted something like this on LinkedIn a while back, and someone commented saying, I prefer the word specialist. They're more comfortable with that. So maybe you can play around with the word and see what sits more comfortably with you. Now, as you can imagine, I meet a lot of teachers or people who have come from a teaching background, and I hear the statement, but I'm just a teacher, not a business person, a lot. And in those situations, we actually start with that statement. We acknowledge that just the act of booking even a discovery call with me, it does make them a business person because they are already thinking along the lines of what kind of support do I need for my business? How can I invest in my business? They're already thinking like an entrepreneur. Now, earlier I mentioned that statement of I need to be realistic. This is one that I can really relate to. Being realistic kept me from thinking big or bigger for a very long time. I'll run you through an exercise that someone shared with me because it was really helpful. If you're a regular listener, then you may have come across it, but it's a good reminder. So, the first part of this exercise is to define the impact that you want to make or the impact that you do make. So, as a tutor, I might say that I go beyond exams. I relate English to the real world in a way that develops critical thinking skills, lifetime skills. As an education business mentor, I help people change their narrative so they can breathe life into their definition of success. So you start with the impact. Then you grab some paper and you mind map all the different ways you could actually make that impact. This exercise is so good at helping you realize how many opportunities there are. And even if you don't pursue all of them, it's an exciting and galvanizing exercise that reroutes you from what you think you can do or can't do. So that's the first mindset block that I wanted to cover, this whole feeling of imposter syndrome. The second one is being open to being both right and wrong. It sounds a bit odd, doesn't it? Why wouldn't someone be open to being right? Well, I'll start there. When I work with people who are just launching a business or they're launching a fresh idea, they typically want to do things in the cheapest way possible, even if it means more work for them. I totally understand this. Why would you invest loads of money into something when you don't even know if it's going to work? Well, I believe that it's important to balance this with an element of risk because what if you end up being right? What if everything works out? What if loads of people want what you're offering and it grows really, really fast? Now, in that situation, I'm talking from experience. Trying to get automation sorted and systems in place is stressful. I know you wouldn't think it. You would think, well, that's a great problem to have, that everything just takes off without you realizing. But when you don't have a plan, when you don't have the infrastructure to cope with it, like I was in that position when I actually launched Upgrade Your Education business, it's really stressful. You almost want things to slow down so that you've got time to catch up. So, in accepting and being open to actually being right, you want to prepare for success. You want to future proof. You can still take a balanced approach. It doesn't mean spending loads and loads of money. For instance, you could automate part of a process and still do the rest of it manually, but at least you've got some of it automated. And later on down the line, if you've designed it as a systematic process, then you can easily automate it or delegate it later. You can opt for cheaper packages and cheaper options for software because no one's going to mind you upgrading later on. But at least you've got some of it automated and taken care of. So it's not this big workload for you and you can cope with growth. If you think that a little bit of outsourcing would be useful, then you could even find a VA or an outsourcer who will accept a smaller retainer than, let's say, the norm. And you can just dip your toe in the water and you can just start delegating a little bit. So that's preparing for being right. But we also need to be prepared to accept being wrong. When we have a great idea, something we're really excited about, something we just know is going to help so many people, it's really hard to turn our backs on them. It's really hard to accept, I don't think this is working, so I'm going to reroute. But the reality is that people only buy things that they know they need and have accepted that they need. I'll give you an example of the latter. Last month in September, I launched the Upgrade Your Mindset in Business book club, and it's in the form of a podcast. People don't even need to read the book. They can rely on the podcast to take action. And it's pretty inexpensive. It's the cheapest thing, really, that I offer. Now, before launching, I did my research with my audience and I concluded there was a demand for it. Lots of people said they were interested. And fortunately, that then followed through in the signups. But there are a few people who have said that, oh, I already had the book, so I thought I would just read it, reread it. Or I've bought the book and I think I'll give it a go on my own. However, they have a history, and if they're honest with themselves, because they've told me this, they have a history of reading mindset books and not taking actions. They don't see it through, or they buy the book, but they don't really start them. It gathers dust on the bookshelf, or they start it, but they don't finish it. All of these scenarios, by the way, completely apply to me. That's one of the reasons I set up this book club. But they still don't want to invest. They still want to give it a go independently. They don't want to invest in being accountable or to fast track the benefits. And that's okay because we're all on our own journeys. But this is an example of where there will always be clients who you really can help, who you can have an impact on, but they're not ready to accept that help or that impact or that support just yet. Now, pointing it out to them will only make people feel defensive. It will only get their backs up. It will make them feel even more determined to prove you wrong. So you have two choices based on your evidence. If you have people signing up to what you offer, that's your proof of concept right there. People are seeing the value, and it's a case of just getting in front of more of the right people, more of those people. If you're not getting signups, despite trying strategies that really should have worked, you may have to rethink your idea. That is a really powerful moment. It's really difficult because accepting that something hasn't quite worked can fuel self-doubt, but it's powerful because if you can master that skill of accepting it, of knowing when to call it, of adapting, and adjusting, then that's going to serve you for the entire lifetime of your entrepreneurial career. Now, my third one is dealing with difficult clients or tricky situations with colleagues, with counterparts. This is a really tough one. Difficult clients will arise, and what constitutes as being difficult is different for everyone. The type of situation that's probably the hardest, though, is when someone questions your integrity or implies that they're questioning your integrity. So I'll talk a little bit about that. Over the last 20 years of being a business owner, I've learned the importance of two things: being assertive and enforcing boundaries. I'll tell you about one of my first lessons in this when I was in my early 20s. I was running a hair and makeup business, which I'm very proud to say 20 years on still runs. And at the same time, I was employed as a business trainer because at the time I absolutely did not believe that a business could give you a full-time income. Anyway, I was often hired by brides. And one thing that's really important when you're involved in a wedding is the timeline, is the timing. And of course, I'm there at the very beginning getting this bride ready. I need to get her ready on time. There's really no leeway here. She needs to arrive to her ceremony on time. So I had this one client one day and I had done my usual preparation. I'd given her her timings. I had half an hour buffer. I arrived 15 minutes early to make sure that I could set up, get her prepared, if you like. I asked her, I prepared her with what she needs to have ready. But when I arrived, and this was like the first red flag, she was not ready. She hadn't really followed any of those instructions. She was late, so I was waiting, which is not good. And she wanted to have a look at the decoration, how all of that was going in the venue. She wanted to say hi to some guests who had arrived early. Now, all of that sounds fair enough. And I thought at the time, well, it is her wedding day and she has, planned for ages and she's got family who've come from afar. So fair enough. That's fine. We've only lost about 25 minutes. I had a half an hour buffer anyway. So as long as we move fast, we should be okay. So I did say to her that, look, we are going to have to get going or you're going to be late. So we made a move. And as I was getting her ready, she kept wanting to stop for a cigarette. And this is where I should have been more assertive. This is where I should have had some boundaries. She kept wanting to stop for a smoke. And I did keep warning her. I did say that, look, it's okay if you want to stop, but you have to be aware you are going to be late. Do you want to check that it's okay for you to be late? And she said, by how much will I be late? And I said, well, it depends how many times we stop. But at the moment, you're probably going to be about half an hour late. And she was like, oh, yeah, it's absolutely fine. And she's having a good time. Her bridesmaids are in the room and all of this. Anyway, the clock was ticking, came time to when she should have been ready. And off, she wasn't. And in that moment, she absolutely flipped. She had a go at me. She said to me, like, I can't believe that you haven't got me ready on time and you're meant to be a professional and all of this. And I was really upset. I thought I'm not going to argue with her. This is her wedding day. She might be feeling quite stressed out at the moment. Her bridesmaids were trying to calm her down. But I felt like it was unfair. I'd given her a heads up. But she was right. I was the professional in that situation. So it wasn't just my job to inform her, it was my job to manage the situation, to make sure being assertive that this is what's going to happen. And this is what I need you to do. And no, you can't go for a smoke right now. You can go for a smoke once I've finished your makeup, for example. Now, I have never made that mistake again. It was really horrible. And in any business, your reputation matters so much. And you have to remember that there are very few clients who will take responsibility. There are very few clients who will hold their hand up and say, yeah, actually, that situation could have been avoided if I had done X, Y, and Z. They will almost always blame the person they paid. So it's really important from that protection point of view as well that you put those boundaries down and that you're assertive with them. Now, on to the one that I wasn't really sure whether or not to include, but given messages and posts that I have seen, things I've experienced, I'm going to talk about it anyway. And this is about receiving or being on the receiving end of hostile or just not very nice behavior from colleagues, counterparts. It shouldn't happen. I wish it didn't, but it does. I have been on the receiving end of some bad behavior a few times, and something you realize very fast is that it's the same names that crop up over and over again. And the good news about this is that they are in the minority. The majority of people in your community, and I can say this with confidence, regardless of which community you're in, the majority of people are actually really nice people. They're supportive. They are not interested in hostile behavior or politics. It's a small portion of people. The more you talk to people, the more you realize it's the same people, and multiple people have similar experiences with those same people. And that really helps put things in perspective to start with. And the real antidote to this is to surround yourself with really good people. You can't change other people's behaviors, but you can change how they impact you. You can remove people from your connections, let's say. You can make sure that you have a boundary around who you let in. And you can surround yourself by people who really lift you up, who really inspire you, who you can share a wobble with, and they will be honest with you, but they will also, again, support you. That it really is the antidote because although we're talking about tricky behavior from other people, this applies to just being a business owner in general, especially a small business owner where you run a business on your own. Maybe you don't have a business partner, for instance. It applies because it can be a very lonely place and things can feel magnified when it's just you and you're in a situation and you don't know how to navigate it. Speaking to other people helps put it in perspective. It helps you build resilience. It just makes the whole journey of being a business owner so much better. And I'm not saying this flippantly because when you're in a situation, it's horrible. It can really impact you. I say this from a place of experience where distancing yourself from it, letting that person just do their thing and you do yours is actually hard to do. But once you do it once, you keep doing it because you realize how good that feels. So I have to say that being on a continual mindset journey really helps me view things differently in different situations, not just the situation I was talking about. And I do have my moments, but they don't tend to last for long. And the most powerful thing is to surround myself with the right people, people who I trust, people who I'm really aligned with, people I feel inspired by. Now, I'll end this episode here because although there are many tough situations that, as a business owner, you might be facing, I think it's more effective to reflect deeply on a few rather than to skim quite a lot at the surface level. I don't want to cover as many scenarios as possible. I want to try and cover the ones we cover well. So maybe I'll save those for a later episode because I have a few more ideas listed. In the meantime, do share this episode with someone else who you think might find it useful. And as you know, this is a free podcast. And the more people who write a review, the more people who share, the more people my podcast reaches. It's really useful for a small podcaster like me. So thanks as always for staying with me and giving me your time, and you'll hear from me on Wednesday. Would you like to take this discussion further? Perhaps you have some questions or you'd like more ideas on tailoring your business. If so, book a free discovery call through the link in the show notes.